of the committee. It looks like the live stream has started. So welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the EITP committee. I can confirm we do have quorum with regrets from Councillor Stroud. Councillor Hill is also joining us this evening. From staff, we have Scott Bagg, Policy and Program Coordinator, Luke Fowle, Director of Engineering, Lana Folds, the Director of Financial Services, Brent Fowler, Director of Corporate Asset Management and Fleet, Brad Joyce, the Commissioner of Transportation and Public Works, Peter Hugenboss, Commissioner of Business, Environment and Projects, Desiree Kennedy, Chief Financial Officer and City Treasurer, Matt Cusin, Manager, Transportation Policy and Programs, Marissa Mascaro, Manager, Transportation Infrastructure, Greg McLean, Policy and Program Coordinator, Derek O'Shea, Acting Deputy City Clerk, is our meeting host for this evening, Julie Salter-Keen, Manager, Climate Leadership, Ian Semple, Director, Transportation Services, and Jeff White, Policy and Program Coordinator, along with myself, Ian Sullivan, as Committee Clerk. We also have two people from GM Blue End Engineering, David Baldessera and Zachary Francisco. We currently have 3 members of the public in the viewing gallery. And with all that out of the way, Mr. Chair, happy to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to call this meeting to order. And I'll just ask, since our vice chair has sent his regrets, I'm going to draft Councillor Osanek in the unlikely event that I may want to talk. So that would be great. Thank you very much. So I'd like a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda, if I might. Thank you, Councillor Holland and Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Thank you. And we have confirmation of minutes from our April 12th meeting. They have been sent out. So is there a mover and a seconder? Councillor Doherty and Councillor Oosterhoff. Seeing no hands, all those in favor? And that carries as well. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move on. We have no delegations. We have one briefing from Councillor Hill, and he will provide introductory remarks, and Ian Semple, Director, and Matt Cusin, Transportation Policies and Programs, will be here to speak to the committee with respect to the transmittal of school pedestrian safety working group recommendations. So the floor is yours, Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair Neil. I want to start by, I have so much to say tonight, and I hope I don't take up more time than you folks want me to, but it's a good opportunity for us to really talk a lot about a great thing that happened in light of a terrible tragedy. And I think it's very important to continue to keep Sochi and her family in our thoughts, and know, I hope the family will know at some point that this terrible loss has certainly inspired, I think, a big change that's coming in the community as laid out in some of the recommendations that are here tonight. I also really want to take an opportunity to thank the committee, because this committee had a lot of work to do and a very short time to do it. And so we asked that anyone who was coming to the committee come with the ability to make decisions and to be able to carry them forward to their organization and get the endorsement that we needed. And they certainly more than did that. So we had representation, obviously, from our staff at the City of Kingston, and they just did an absolutely tremendous job. I think you'll see that in the report tonight. But we had representation from our school boards, from the Tri-Board Transportation Authority, which directs all busing in the three boards, from the French language boards, from the Kingston Police Service, from Public Health, We had parent representation on the committee, and they were incredibly valuable. You know, this has been a concern for so many different school communities. And so I really want to thank the committee. The Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation provided us with incredibly valuable information. I'm going to share a little bit about that as we go along. I also really want to thank Councillor Osanek. Councillor Osanek, of course, is the councillor in the district where this accident occurred. That was the impetus for this committee's work. And I think it was important, and I think she recognized early on that this, although we were focused at that time on this one or two school communities on Lancaster Drive, that it needed to be broader than that, and that it needed to apply to the school communities right across Kingston. And the result of that is tonight's report, which has application to every single school community in Kingston. And I think that is critically important. Just before I turn it over to staff to look at the specifics of the recommendation, I want to just kind of very briefly touch on the 5 recommendations that we have here, because there are 5. There are only 5 recommendations, but they're huge, and every one of them has a lot more work involved and a lot more work to do. So if I'll just go through them in the order that they're listed and just say just a couple quick words about them. The first one is to strike a panel to assess and prioritize school transportation safety issues. And I think some of the councillors that have been around for a while will recall that there was a committee, a liaison committee between the boards and the city that sort of went defunct because it didn't seem to have a real agenda to address, and now it does. So as we identify specific school issues that need to be addressed, there is going to be a process and a protocol for ensuring that it goes up the line at both the school board level, the school board level, and to the city, and that relationship is cemented, and that those problems as they are identified can be addressed quickly. I think that's a very critical recommendation going forward. I think the biggest recommendation in terms of heavy lifting for the city, it will be the implementation of the community safety zone. So I know everybody would like this to start at every school in every district on day 1. But of course, it involves a lot of work, and I know again staff will go through that work. So we're looking at 2 areas to focus on initially. So that would be in Strathcona Park at St. Paul's and Strathcona Park School, and on Lancaster with Mother Teresa, Holy Cross, and the Lancaster Public Schools. But the commitment is that community safety zones will be implemented at every school by the end of 2023. And that's a very ambitious target. Director Semple has assured us that that is a target that we can meet, and I'm very excited about that. Number 3 is one that's going to involve a lot more work going forward. This is the establishment of a formalized ongoing school streets program. And you know that we approved that program at Winston Churchill Public School. I think they have a celebration of that on Friday, this Friday or next Friday, coming up anyway, just to acknowledge the 1 year of that school street program being in place. I have to say that this probably was the recommendation that excited people the most, because it has the most potential to really engage all of the partners. So school boards, parent, community and councils, police services, KCAT, all coming together to provide this school street endeavor. And I have to tell you that of all the things that we discussed, the one thing that seemed like the surest bet is if we could implement school streets particularly in those like Mother Teresa and Lancaster would be a perfect example of that. But if we could implement a school street program on that street, I think that we could almost 100% guarantee that this kind of incident would never happen again. So I really see this as incredibly valuable, but it's also the most at risk in terms of a proposal, because it does rely on volunteers. It does rely on an organization. It does rely on school boards, identifying someone who will coordinate this. And then, of course, it relies on city providing some resources. Those resources from the city's end are available almost immediately. But it does take a lot of coordination to get the volunteers in place. If we can do that, and in some communities in England, for example, this is a widespread practice and it's been very, very successful. I think this has the most potential to really, really safeguard our kids on their way to school. So I'm excited about that. I certainly hope that that's one that will continue and develop, and that we'll see it in most of our school districts where it's appropriate. One of the things that we talked about right off the bat was that we were looking for consistency, so that a driver driving into one school district would recognize it immediately as a school district, would know what kind of education the kids have had around road safety. They would know what the implications are for them if they don't follow the rules of the road, and that we know that staff and students have all been educated around how to get to school safely. And we talked a lot about, for those of us that are older, might remember Elmer the Safety Elephant programs, and all the kids used to experience that program. And that was, basically it was about getting to school safely. And so we're pulling resources together, and the public health unit, the Kingston Police, the City of Kingston, and the school boards all have resources to assist in developing those education programs. And I think that the result of that is going to be a lot better understanding, not just for kids, but we're also going to extend that to parents in the community. So and the school councils will have a role, and the school boards obviously will have a role in ensuring that there's a parent education component to this as well. So that's going to be a very important one as well. And then this is something we've talked about for forever. This is about prioritizing enforcement within the school districts. One of the things that can happen, of course, with the implementation of the community safety zones is that we can do more technological enforcement. And so that may be one of the avenues that we explore. I suspect it will be. But we also looked at and talked at length with the police service about the potential for them to really make traffic safety, particularly around schools, a priority every day, so that parents and drivers in the neighborhood will know that that the police are there, that they're watching for infractions, and that those infractions are going to be enforced. So that's a particularly important aspect of this as well. So this was a lot of work, and it was supported by, like I said, a very incredible committee. I'm very, very proud of the work they did and the timelines that they met, and I want to really extend my thanks to all of them. And a special thanks go out to Director Semple and his staff. I know that they're going to go through the recommendations in much more detail than I did, but I just want to thank them. Their work behind the scenes in getting this together and pulling this team together was second to none. So I really appreciate that. And with your permission, Chair, I'll turn it over to Director Semple.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to present tonight the findings and recommendations from the School Pedestrian Safety Working Group. Next slide. These recommendations, the full recommendations and details, can be found in Exhibit A of the EITP report, but I'll take you through some of the sections tonight, including some of the information that the working group looked at, the issues and the way in which the recommendations were developed. Next slide. So the working group formed on the direction of council and included members from the school boards, parent councils, Kingston Police, public health, school transportation providers, and the city. The group was tasked with identifying the road safety issues that were present, looking at existing or possible solutions, gathering input from the public, and developing recommendations to be delivered back to committee and back to council. Next slide. As part of the initial working group meetings, our focus was on defining and understanding the issues being faced in and around the school areas. Three main issues were noted as part of these discussions. The first being that there are real and perceived safety concerns, especially for those that are walking or biking to school, that contribute to a self-reinforcing cycle where more families end up driving to school, which increases the congestions in and around the school areas and the pressures during school pickup and drop-off times. There are inherent conflicts between the safety of those pedestrians in the school area and the convenience sought by motorists to access the school area and the convenience sought by that. And the streets adjacent to the schools are dynamic throughout the day. The congested nature of the school area during the pickup and drop-off times can create safety issues, especially for pedestrians. Next slide. We also considered information on how students were traveling to school. So using data from the 2019 Household Travel Survey, it was noted that approximately 34,000 daily trips to school occur. Approximately 20% of the students walk or cycle, 30% take the bus, and 40% are driven. So in that data, more than 1/3 of the students being driven to school live less than 1.6 kilometers away. That's less than a mile. And this is the distance that's suitable for walking or cycling to school. And this number alone could eliminate more than 5,000 daily vehicle trips that are occurring around the city's school areas. Next slide. To further inform the work that the group was undertaking, public engagement was conducted in April to identify issues and potential solutions. Approximately 300 responses were received, with more than 40 school locations represented in the responses, outlining issues and potential solutions. Next slide. As part of this engagement, three key themes emerged as common issues that were faced: difficulty getting to school safely, a chaotic arrival and dismissal environment in the school areas, and speeding or other poor motorist behaviors. The themes found in these issues were very similar to the issues developed by the working group. The engagement also sought input on solutions, with the majority of the suggestions centered around facilitating safer active school travel, providing safer pickup and drop-off options, and addressing motorist behavior. The feedback also suggests that while there are common issues across all schools, every school has a different context and some issues are more severe or prevalent compared to others. Next slide. Ahead of reviewing new solutions to address school safety issues, the working group looked at the existing tools that were being used by the city and partners and stakeholders. These tools include school site design, school operations, roadway design and treatments, regulations and enforcement, pedestrian crossings, school crossing guards, and active school travel planning. There was a recognition amongst the working group stakeholders that there were many existing tools available that could be used in a more holistic manner in the future if the work was done to identify the issue or issues that needed to be addressed. Next slide. So as Councillor Hill has laid out in his introductory remarks, based on the information review and the public engagement process, the working group has 5 recommendations to enhance school pedestrian safety. The recommendations require leadership and participation from all partners and need to be prioritized for action. I'll provide an overview of each recommendation in brief, and the full details are included in the working group memo for review. Next slide. Recommendation 1 is to create a panel of technical stakeholders that can holistically review school transportation safety issues. Representatives from the school boards, Kingston Police, Public Health, Tri-Board Transportation, and city staff would meet to review concerns that have been raised and look to identify the nature of the issue and steps that could be taken to address. The panel would draw upon the resources that exist in all organizations and work together to prioritize the tools that could be used individually or together to best address the concern. The panel can also assist in prioritizing issues to be addressed and ensuring resources are available to address the issues in a timely manner. Next slide. To reinforce that the school areas and neighborhoods that surround them should be safe and comfortable for residents that are walking and cycling, the second recommendation is to implement community safety zones in existing school areas and to establish further neighborhood and school area speed limit reductions to be rolled out across the city. The rollout of these programs are recommended in 3 phases. This fall, 2 full-scale school and neighborhood area pilot projects could be implemented, where community safety zones are designated in the school areas and speed limits within these community safety zones are reduced to 30 kilometers an hour. This would be coupled with a neighborhood area speed limit, which would reduce residential speed limits from 50 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour. And work would also be done to integrate additional measures like pavement markings, line painting, traffic calming, and parking regulations to reinforce the priority and safety of pedestrians. Once these pilots are in place and are under evaluation, all other school areas would be designated as community safety zones, and signage would be installed across the city with a target to complete the installation at all locations for fall 2023. Additional neighborhood and school area speed limit reductions would then be rolled out in other neighborhoods based on the learnings from the fall 2022 pilot implementations. Next slide. Staff have prepared 2 conceptual maps showing the community safety zones and broader neighborhood area and school area speed limit reduction pilots that can be implemented for the fall in the Westwoods and the Strathcona Park neighborhoods. The concepts shown on your screen show gateway signage that would be installed at all entry points to the neighborhood to note the 40 kilometer an hour speed limit, and the community safety zone along the frontages of the schools where the speed limit would be reduced to 30 kilometers an hour. Next slide. In 2021, the Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, commonly known as KCAT, piloted the operation of a program that closed the streets in front of Winston Churchill School each school day during pickup and drop off. KCAT presented several times to the working group on their experience with the program and the success it has had, but reiterated that there needed to be financial and resource support from the partners to continue and expand it further. From a safety standpoint, the school street program addresses many of the concerns and issues raised, as it removes vehicles from the school area during the busiest times and truly prioritizes the students that are walking or cycling. To build upon this program, the working group recommends that there be a commitment by Kingston area school boards and the City of Kingston to support and explore options to fund, through the end of the 2023 school year, the operating expenses and capital investments needed to continue and expand the program. And pending consultation with school administration and boards, that the program continue at Winston Churchill and be expanded to additional locations with the initial expansion opportunity presented to the schools on Lancaster Drive. It's also recommended that the city formalize the School Streets program as an ongoing, approved opportunity that stakeholders can access through the city's road closure process, with the programming administered by KCAT in partnership with operational resourcing provided by the school boards. The city would provide all traffic safety materials and review required to start up and operate the programs at the various locations. Next slide. The fourth recommendation relates to travel and safety education for all users in the school areas, parents, students, and motorists. It's recommended that the school boards develop and distribute materials covering road safety principles, active travel resources, school area parking restrictions, and motorist etiquette guidance in partnership with Public Health, Kingston Police, and the city as part of a parent education program. The boards will also collaboratively develop and incorporate road and active travel safety into messaging to students through classroom opportunities and take-home materials, drawing from existing resources and in partnership with Public Health. The city, in partnership with Public Health and Kingston Police, will develop and lead a motorist education campaign to increase the understanding of existing neighborhood and school area road safety regulations, the infrastructure, the policies, and the programs to minimize unsafe motorist behavior and support increased rates of active travel to the schools throughout Kingston. Next slide. The final recommendation relates to enforcement in school areas that can help to curb dangerous and poor motorist behavior. Kingston Police committed to prioritizing roadway enforcement and pedestrian safety in the newly designated community safety zones, and will also incorporate enforcement in school areas as part of their monthly selective traffic enforcement program. The city's parking bylaws that apply near schools are designed to accommodate school buses, prioritize pedestrian safety, and in some cases allow for student pickup and drop off by parents and caregivers. The working group noted that non-compliance with the parking bylaws near schools can result in decreased access for buses and poses a risk to students and staff entering and leaving the schools. It's recommended that an assessment of the current fine amounts be undertaken to inform whether an increase in the fines could further discourage motorists from disregarding the posted regulations. Automated speed enforcement, also referred to as photo radar or ASE, is an automated system that uses speed measurement devices and cameras to enforce speed limits. While ASE is not currently in operation in Kingston, the working group recommends that the city explore the introduction of ASE within the community safety zones at schools to improve voluntary compliance with posted speed limits and further deter unsafe driving in school areas. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation on the findings from the School Pedestrian Safety Working Group. Happy to answer any questions that you have about the findings or recommendations. I'm joined tonight by a number of staff from the Transportation Services team that can help develop some of the technical and policy components of the recommendations that are present in the memo. And we look forward to any questions or discussion.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much. I will now turn to the committee. If you have any questions for either Councillor Hill or for Ian Semple, I see Councillor Holland is waving at me. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so a question about enforcement. So I know we're going to get more information on what exactly that will look like, but I'm curious about the areas for enforcement. Like, so for example, Molly Brandt, where it's actually the school parking lot that is often a big challenge. So that would be where currently it's school staff and parents who do some kind of enforcement in that area. We wouldn't be able to have city bylaw folks or police on site there. So will we be looking at, are we looking beyond just the adjacent streets to the school? Will we also be looking at what's happening on site, or even was there any talk in the discussion about possibly blocking off the parking lots?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for your question, Councillor Holland. I think you're correct. So the ability for city staff to enforce within the school property is limited from that side. There are ways in which the parking regulations can be enforced by the school, but it would be completed on site. Some of what you're speaking about is what was discussed as it relates to the school site design and operation. So there was a lot of discussion and a lot of comments that came in as part of the public engagement about the way in which the sites themselves operate. And in my briefing, I sort of referred to the dynamic and congested nature of the school areas. That's both on street and in the sites. And it is a very compressed time period for pickup and drop off, where everyone is arriving and everyone is leaving, and everyone wants to do that as fast as possible. And we need to make sure that that happens as safely as possible. So some of those internal site configurations and site operations, that is important for the city to discuss with the school boards and the school sites to understand how that can be mitigated in the overall sort of school area. There's a counter to that as well, where pushing all of those issues out onto the city street is also not the approach that should be put in place in all those areas. So it's about finding the balance and getting at what the core issue is, and then addressing it through some of the tools that we have available.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to note that Trustee Morning from the Limestone District School Board brought that issue forward as well. And there was a lot of discussion about Molly Brandt because it is one of the more high priority neighborhoods that need to be addressed. In fact, every situation where we have a combination of secondary schools and elementary schools side by side is a big issue, right? Particularly as it relates to student drivers and all those sorts of things. So that would be a perfect example of what will happen with recommendation number 1. So that will almost immediately go to that committee that's going to look at prioritizing solutions for individual school situations, and that would certainly be one of them.
Thank you. And a follow-up, Councillor Holland.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really good to hear. I guess the next question really speaks to the latter part of what Mr. Semple was talking about. So no, we don't want that equation. We don't want to shift the parking lot situation onto the street. So again, with Molly Brandt, we have a problem with the street out front. And I'm wondering about the suggestion within the report for the use of the designated drop-off pickup sites. Some places have them already, I know. Will that be reviewed? The location of those be reviewed? Because again, thinking about Lion Street, that's a very narrow street, and there's a designated spot on that street, which has caused a lot of other problems.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so I think that example that you're bringing up, Councillor Holland, is an example of, could be an example of where an individual tool has been used in response to a request or a concern that's been raised that likely would have benefit from a more holistic discussion with all of the partners. And so I think we've got, in one of the slides and in the report, you will see there are a wide range of tools that are used by many of the partners that were part of the working group. The city has regulatory tools available to us, both from a parking standpoint, but from a speed limit standpoint, in the way that we manage the right of way. But we also have other tools that are available, that we can access through the school boards and through public health and through others that may help to get at some of those pieces. So an example, as an example, for when there is parking congestion outside of a school and when there is, I guess, competition for that pickup and drop off area, there are ways in which we can designate other areas, provide information and mapping to parents and caregivers about where they can park and then walk back to the school. So we call it the Park and Stride program. And so we develop mapping for schools. We can partner with the school so that it's shared to the parents and the caregivers so they have access to that information. And we can change the regulations in and around the school to reinforce that and support it. But all of that, I think, is enriched by more discussion between all of the stakeholders versus working on the issue independently or individually.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Osanek, and followed by Councillor Oosterhoff. Go ahead, Councillor Osanek.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to say thank you for Councillor Hill for chairing the committee, the working group, and also to Councillor McLaren. Thank you very much. And so my first 3 questions go to Councillor Hill. For that working group, Councillor Hill, about how many meetings did it take? Because this is a great report. It's very detailed. How many meetings were held, and did you count the number of hours? Was every meeting an hour, 2 hours? Did you have to do a really big session at some point? And how many people were in this working group?
I thank you, Councillor. It was actually an absolute honor to be chair of this committee. It was really one of the reasons you know, obviously the circumstances surrounding it are terribly tragic, but it's one of those things that I think anybody who gets on council is trying to do, right? Is to do something to improve the community. And I really feel like this committee has done that. I would have to say we had about 8 sort of formal meetings, not even that, maybe just 6 formal meetings. Ian would know for sure, or Director Semple would know for sure. But we also had some pretty high flyers in terms of people who were involved from other organizations. So we didn't want to take up too much of their time. So we scheduled every other Wednesday a 2-hour meeting. And we said we would absolutely stick to that schedule, and we were able to do that. We probably had at any given time 15 to 20 people who were in attendance, and you know, a good representation from every sector, right? So it was a very cooperative committee, but I have to say that it went as smoothly as it did because of the work that staff did. A good example would be gathering all of the public input. I think there was over 300 you know, pieces of input from the public that had to be gathered and sorted and shared, and staff did that, and so everything that came to our committee was very had been worked through a lot, you know, and so I again, my thanks go out to staff for that. But the committee was very, very purposeful and very committed to getting this done and recognizing that the timeline was short. So they really worked very hard to get it all done.
Great. Thanks for answering those questions. And thank you too for staff. I'll save all the thank yous, all the other thank yous for when we have this on business. So right now I'll just ask some questions to staff. And so the gateway area speed limits, thank you for making Westwoods one of those gateways right off the bat, Mr. Semple. And I just wondered, so if we look at this for the fall and we put up the signs, how are all the residents in Westwood and also Strathcona Park, because that's the second gateway area, how are they going to be informed of the speed limit change on those streets to 40 kilometers per hour? What will be the public education there?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Osanik. So we'll be bringing an implementation, presuming the recommendations are passed by council, we'll be bringing implementation reports to the July 12th meeting of council that would outline the specific pieces that are city responsibilities related to the working group recommendations. We can outline what how the various program elements would be communicated. But we certainly, you know, a large part of a speed limit change, it rests in the sign and in the installation of the sign. And I think we have already begun to develop some of the communication pieces that would be familiar to residents in that neighborhood, with some of our park and stride maps and other things that have been part of the discussion over the past year. And so I think we can prepare some communication about what is coming. And I think more importantly about why it is coming, so that they understand that this change is part of an overall change for the neighborhood that is intended to, you know, the change of this overall speed in the neighborhood is intended to reinforce the speed reduction in the school zone area, in the community safety zone area, around the schools as well, to really impress upon all motorists that the area is an area that requires extra attention and care when you are operating a vehicle through there. But we will, to answer your question, we'll include all of those details as we can in the implementation reports.
Okay, thank you. And then for the rollout in the fall of 2023 to all the other school zones areas, that would also then be 40 kilometers per hour. What about the schools that are on a highway. Not that I'm not advocating that they have to be lowered, because I wasn't part of this working group and I don't know if that's a concern. But for instance, like Frontenac High School is on Bath Road, that's 60, or Collins Bay Public School, it's already 50 instead of 60 in front of the school. And I know for Councillor Osterhoff, right, there's Elginburg, public school. And so because they're on highways, is that also going to have a speed limit reduction in the fall of 2023, or just the schools and the residential areas across the city?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so we will include some of that discussion in the implementation report, but as my staff are quick to remind me as well, the speed limits that we're talking about here are not directly related to a community safety zone. So the speed limit can be set as part of the community safety zone. So we would look at what the appropriate speed limit is for some of those site-specific areas. So you are correct. If there is a school area that is along an existing roadway with an 80-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, the intention is that is not reduced down to 30 kilometers an hour. We would look at those site-specific constraints and provide a recommendation back about how that would be implemented. But each of the schools will have a designated community safety zone around that school area. That is what would be implemented by the fall.
Okay, thank you very much. And then for the 300 surveys, like the respondents for all the different schools, like Winston Churchill, they got 18 responses. That was one of the fourth highest. And because they're already, like the pilot project for the school street program, do you remember, or does Councillor Hill remember, like what were some of those 18 responses? Like, were there still, even with the school street program, were there still even other safety concerns, or were most of those responses just saying, yeah, like the school safety zone has really made a difference? I just wondered, like, what else safety concerns Winston Churchill could still have, since they have the school street program.
Through you, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the specifics of each of those responses, Councillor Standing. We can definitely provide that back, and it is included as part of the information that I think the intent is, with all of that information that was gathered with the public engagement, it represents a pretty rich pretty rich information to start with at the school safety panel to be able to look at those issues. I think, from what I recall, the majority of the responses around Winston Churchill Public School were related to it being positive with the school street in place. I will say, it just, as it relates to the number of responses received from each school, there was quite a bit of discussion at the working group as well around the equity in the way that school issues would be addressed. And so this sense of, if there was 300 responses, but they all came from 2 schools, are we only going to work on those 2 schools? And so that is fundamentally, I think, part of, again, of what that panel would be able to do. So it's intended that those issues come in through whatever avenue they come in. They can come in through counselors, they can come in through our customer service, they can come in through principals at schools or through the school boards, but that it would be looked at in a way that where the issue itself is assessed, not necessarily just focusing on a specific school based on the number of responses, but that we look at a couple of layers lower to determine what the actual issue is there. So we have all of that information. All of that information would be shared with the panel so that it can be considered, and that then understanding of how the issues would be addressed would be looked at there.
And I would echo what Director Semple said. Most of them were positive comments. You're always going to get a couple of people who don't want the street closed down, right? So you're going to hear from them. That's inevitable. But his point about equity was really a major focus of the work that was done, because we know that there are some school communities who probably have a louder voice other school communities will. And perhaps more access to parent volunteers and different things like that. So, how do we find a balance? How do we ensure that schools that need the support the most get it, and that they're, particularly if they have specific individual issues, that they're addressed. And so that was a very important, and I would say actually a fairly prolonged. It came up in most meetings because there was a definite recognition, especially among the trustees, that not all school communities are necessarily created equal, right? And so how do we make sure that their issues are addressed? And I think that's going to be handled very well with the panel.
Perfect. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I just have two more questions.
Go right ahead.
One of them is about the intake process. So yeah, Director Semple, so now we have the school transportation safety panel, right? So what happens if a parent comes to the city councilor with an issue in front of one of the schools? Are we supposed to refer the parent to their parent council, or are we supposed to take it and forward their concern to you? What do we do?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so this also was a point of discussion amongst the working group. So the intent of the panel is not to create a separate sort of issue intake. The school boards, the schools, the city, all of our partners have a way in which we talk with our residents and our clients and our students. So it's not about creating a separate process for that. It's about ensuring that when an issue comes up, it has a place to go that is dealt with in a holistic way, rather than by the individual department or the individual organization that it received. So we will have some more details about that, I think, as we have our discussions with the partners. I don't think the intent would be to, that if a residence, all of a sudden mentions school, you go, well, hold on, off you go over to this separate process that we've set up. I think we as the city we will intake that issue, from yourself or from our customer service system, and make sure that it goes for consideration. I think a discussion as part of that group. So I don't think it's about shepherding our residents or our clients to a whole bunch of different areas to air their concern, but we would want to make sure that all of the partners were aware of the issue, and so that we can set the action from there.
And we're trying to get rid of the silo, right? So if it comes in, because how often people sort of take a shotgun approach to issues that come up. You contact every single person you can think of. What we're doing is sort of say, we can streamline this process. You contact, for example, your principal. Your principal would contact your the area superintendent. The area superintendent would say, this merits consideration at the panel. The panel then would consider it. And that can happen also through a district counselor. If it went the other way, for example. So it's just a matter of making sure that there's a protocol for ensuring that all of these are considered.
Thank you. So I can forward a complaint if someone complains to Director Semple then. Okay, great. So then my very last question was something in the report, and I think it said if the panel or staff identified a concern at one of the schools that I can't remember. I'm on here. I only got one screen right now. It said something that the concern would be raised with the district counselor as part of stage 1 or level 1 of the traffic calming, the yearly traffic calming. And so would that mean, Mr. Semple, that for that year, how right now our new traffic calming policy is that we submit one street per year. We submit one street per year to you, right? If there was a traffic calming problem in front of one of the schools in our district, that would then be our choice for that 1 year. Is that how it is?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I think the language that you're seeing in the report and in the memo is more, I think, also reflecting that we want information or issues that are coming into the panel. We would also want to make sure that others are aware of it, including district councilors. So part of the traffic calming program commitment was that if councilors wished, staff can provide sort of a summary of the issues and concerns that had been raised. So we would be able to provide that to the councilors, but also indicate, and these streets or these concerns that have been brought up in the context of a school safety issue as well. So it's not about expanding the traffic calming program, but it's about ensuring that the right information is provided back if that request comes from the district councillor to provide a list of streets or a list of issues that had been raised that year.
Thanks for answering all my questions.
Thank you. And I believe I saw Councillor Oosteroff's hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I certainly want to echo the words of Councillor Osanek and everyone. I'm very, very impressed with the promptness of this feedback from the committee and the results. Very, very impressive. The one concern, and maybe somehow you have addressed it in concern, but I'm sure there will be. I am referring to Elginburg Public School, and there'll be some disappointment that it's not all the schools. But I understand the magnitude of the work. But what I'm wondering is, when you talked about partners, would there be a way that schools that are also high risk could be informed and already have established committees, already have a safety teams with parents and that they could tag along, or more than that, we recognize that we can only implement 2 programs, but we're recognizing that there are other critical zones exist, and 1 year will feel like a long time. So have you considered that? And is there a way that they can gain, see the model, implement their own, like almost mirror what you have, though we know we've done a fair bit in Elginburg. Director Semple knows that we have done a fair bit of work there, but I know that they would like to have more. But what I'm wondering, if you have considered that, or is there something that we can consider once you talked about the implementation, where other schools can at least come alongside and do what they can over this year?
Maybe I'll just take a run at that before Director Semple. So, yes, I think every school, Councillor Oosteroff, wants to be on the list, right? I mean, yeah. That's, and I understand that makes sense. But there are lots of things here that they can be involved in almost immediately. So, exactly. The educational programs for drivers, for students and parents, that's certainly going to be probably available. I would assume available in all school districts pretty quickly. And I know Elginburg might not fit Elginburg, but for a lot of schools, the ongoing the streets program would be something that they could access, assuming that they had volunteers and coordination to do that. So, a lot of this is going to get out, right? So a lot of school, and if I go back to my days as principal, I know that most school councils right now are talking about this, and will want to be involved to the extent that they can. Of course, it makes sense that we ensure that the model works, but our efforts to roll it out by 2023, that's pretty ambitious. But by 2023, every school will be a community safety zone. So that is about as quick as we can do it. If there are individual situations that have to be addressed in the short term, because it's a pressing safety need, more pressing than sort of typical, then that would go through the panel for assessment and action by the city or the board or whomever has to address that.
Well, that encourages me a lot. And maybe Mr. Semple or Ian has a comment on that. For example, the 50 kilometers in front of Elginburg School. I know that could it already by September, could it be dropped to 40?
No, because it wouldn't be a community safety zone yet, right? So that won't happen until it's a community safety zone, unless there was other traffic issues. And I guess I will let Director Semple speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Oosterhoff. So I think it's, I think this is sort of comes back to the crux of there are a lot of schools, there are a lot of issues that we wish, that want to be addressed. We would look at those issues at the panel, I think, to get input from the school boards and the schools to help assess and where those priorities would be. But as Councillor Hill noted, if there are safety issues that are developing, we don't, it's the city staff, we will still react and respond in the same way to safety concerns and issues that are raised by the community. So we'll investigate that issue. We'll understand what's going on there. We may then take that to the panel to discuss further, but there might be actions that we take to address that concern more immediately. I will echo what Councillor Hill was saying in that for us to implement in the pilot areas for the fall, and then to implement the community safety zone pieces in the school frontages for the following fall, that is aggressive for us, because this is in addition to the existing work plan and other capital projects that are coming, including other safety changes, including active transportation and sidewalk elements that are coming forward, and also pedestrian crossing pieces that will be coming and being put in play too. So we certainly would respond to any sort of immediate safety issue and look to see what we can do. But we will need to look at how we can prioritize not just work around the schools, but the overall work plan that we have committed across the board from an infrastructure standpoint to make sure that we're delivering on all of our commitments.
Yes, and I do understand, Mr. Chair, the challenge presented and the workload. But I guess I can carry on conversation with Mr. Semple later, because I know that we have issues there, and significant issues over the winter, and some considerable anxiety there. So I guess I wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want to overload you with more on that. I want to be clear, but I had thought that if there was someone who, anybody can attend a meeting, but you have your initial committee that others can listen in and even take whatever can be applied now, I guess, for safety, for our kids' sake, at all the schools. Hopefully they will adopt them and in some way to be, safer. And I know I'm going to hear about that very, very soon for as the summer wears on. So thank you for that. And that's my biggest concern, but I do want to commend everyone for the work being done. And I know it will spread to all the other schools. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. And this is where one of those, where we wear different hats, right? So we are both a district councillor, and of course we're concerned about every school in our district. Absolutely. But we're also a city councillor, and so we have to be concerned about the implementation across the city. And it's tough. I mean, because I know I have schools in my district that I really want addressed. I'm sure we'll hear that at the council table, right? But I can't imagine that we could get this done more quickly than what we're trying to achieve. So we just have to, I guess, be patient. And I know it's tough to be patient right now.
Yeah, well, there is some other water under the bridge, but thank you for that. And I'll certainly have conversations with Mr. Semple. And I want to thank staff for all the work they've done too. This is, and they're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Doherty, I didn't see your hand, but I was anticipating. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Chair. And just like everyone else, I really want to thank everyone involved for all of the work and for this real speedy report that's come to us, because a lot of work has gone into it. And of course, I feel left out too, just like Councillor Oosterhoff. I have quite a few schools in my districts. So more is the question is, how can we tap into some of the lessons learned and some of the conversations that have taken place? So just want to go over who participated. Did all of the principals from all the schools participate to date? And what about parent council? And could this report be shared to all parent councils and they can grab what they can work with?
Yeah, so what we did was we asked boards to identify, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, we asked boards to identify who they wanted to have at the table. We were a bit concerned that if we invited the school councils from each school, it would really become a kind of a free-for-all about that school. I share your concern, Councillor Doherty. I too don't have anything happening in with the schools in my district right now. So I suspect I'm going to hear from some of those school councils that are concerned. But what the boards did was they identified some principals to join us and members of their system school council. And they asked them really to put the system hat on and to look at it more broadly. And, it was tough, right? It was tough because we all had individual issues that we would like to have had dealt with at that committee. However, I do believe that the recommendations are very broad based, but that they will have a real impact. And I think that's the thing. Often when we make broad based recommendations, they're limited in terms of their impact, right? But in this case, I think this umbrella of recommendations is going to make a huge difference. And then with the panel that will look at individual issues that sort of go beyond that umbrella of solutions that we're putting in place, I think it really will allow us to address even the most kind of minute issues at individual schools. But it can't happen for everybody in September as much as we want it to.
No, totally makes sense. Thanks for that. But I guess I'm just wondering too how we can make the most of everything that has already taken place. Like, how will that be communicated to all of the schools through their principal, to their school parent council? Like, what communication process?
Well, part of this, again, we're sort of in different jurisdictions, right? So school councils and staff that work at school boards, they come under that jurisdiction. So we know that the boards have made a commitment to this, and that they're going to share this report widely. We'll certainly be sharing it as widely as we can. But they've put their school councils on their mailing list for the recommendations. So they'll all get a copy of this report. I suspect we'll all be hearing from them shortly. But sort of responsibility, I guess, lies with the school boards and because that's their jurisdiction, right, to deal with schools, school principals, school councils. But we're all doing it together, so I think it'll be effectively communicated.
Great, yes.
Thank you. Could I ask? I'm sorry, Councillor Doherty, were you finished? Okay. Could I ask Councillor Osanek to take the chair, please?
Yep, I take the chair and recognize you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Semple this. I've got two toddler grandkids who are both going to start at Portsmouth Public School in the French immersion in 2023. So I'm curious if you're familiar with that. The school itself is on a quieter side street, but there's a playing field behind it that goes all the way out to Portsmouth Avenue. And I'm just curious whether that playing field would also be considered potentially as part of the school zone, and therefore some of the great recommendations that your committee has brought forward, would they apply to the Portsmouth area of that school as well?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I am familiar with that school, and so there are instances, that school is an example, but there are multiple sort of schools, I think, across the city where there is, a main frontage and an entry frontage that might be on sort of a residential street, but then they may be bordered by some higher speed streets, collectors or arterials. So we would, again, in looking at where the community safety zone would apply, we look at where that needs to be effective, I think, in order to address the transportation safety issues that might be present at the school. So that may just be the initial frontage of the school, but it may also be some of the other streets that are connected or surround in around the school. An example that we talked about at the working group was, I believe, was Wellborn Public School, that actually has entrances into the school area from 3 or 4 different locations. So bounded, with 4 different streets where there may be parents doing pickup and drop off, and then allowing their children to use a pathway that would come into the school. So I think understanding the travel patterns of where the students are coming from, and where those areas need to be addressed would then help inform where those the community safety zones are in place for the school areas.
I appreciate that. I'll give you a warning. I won't be on council anymore, but I may be lobbying you nonetheless. So thank you very much.
I return the chair.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions? Seeing none, I believe, and I just lost it on my phone, but I believe we have a second briefing. And it's, here we go. Brent Fowler, Director, Corporate Asset Management and Fleet, David Baldessera, and Zachary Francisco, GM Blue Plan, will be present to speak to the committee with respect to the core asset management plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Tonight's briefing is around an overview of our core asset management plan. Next slide, please. So through the briefing, we'll cover the key milestones related to the provincial regulation, provide some definitions around what we consider core versus non-core assets. We will provide some explanations around how we define levels of service, as well as a brief overview of the transportation asset management plan. After that, we'll illustrate some of the continuous improvement initiatives that were discovered throughout the project and endorsed by the project team, as well highlight to the committee the next steps as we move through the provincial regulations and our asset management planning. Next slide, please. So as you can see, this started in effect back actually at the very end of 2017, came into effect January 1, 2018. The city established its asset management policy, and it was approved by council back in April of 2019. Right now, we're at the stage where we've completed our core asset management plan for what we define as the city's core assets, which we'll walk through a little later on. This framework covers off the city's current levels of service, as well outlines the cost to maintain the current levels of service for those particular assets. Next slide, please. Core assets. So the city's has a diverse portfolio of assets. What the regulation defines as core assets includes things like roads, bridges, culverts, retaining walls, and our stormwater systems. As well, Utilities Kingston presented their asset management plan related to the city's water and wastewater assets back in October of 2019, and that was approved by council at that time. For non-core assets, this would include things like traffic and streetlights, parks, buildings, fleet assets, IT infrastructure, as well as the assets for a number of external agencies that the city supports, such as the Kingston Frontenac Public Library and Kingston Police Services. Next slide, please. What's critical about our asset management planning is that it's integrated and follows the framework that was established with the strategic asset management policy, as well that it's included and part of the city's strategic planning. This includes integrating our asset management plans with the city's master plans, such as active transportation, parks and rec, as well as our climate action, climate leadership plans. An effective asset management program requires an holistic framework to establish and guide the practice of strategic decision-making. This integrated approach cannot be done in isolation from other municipal goals and strategic priorities. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to David Baldessaro and Zach Francisco to walk through some additional material.
So the asset management plan has various sections, including the main sections are the state of the assets, levels of service, asset management strategies. Not for this 2022 requirement, but in the 2025 requirement, there's a financing strategy. And then as well, the section for improvement and monitoring of the plan. Next slide, please. So the asset management really starts, and the focus for, as Brent said, the 2022 requirements is for core assets. On your city side, the summary of them is your roads and stormwater are in fair condition, with your bridges and culverts in good, and you have approximately $2 billion in core assets. On the water wastewater side that Utilities Kingston manages, they have approximately $1.5 billion. Next slide, please. Levels of service are an important part of this asset management plan, and they're used as a way to express how the city's infrastructure is meeting the community's expectations. We do this or presented in two ways, technical levels of service and customer levels of service. Technical levels of service are usually more quantitative. They're used by staff and are applied against assets and overall systems to define the performance requirements and criteria to drive the business decisions and to really understand where and when to spend money on your infrastructure. On the customer or community levels of service, these are ways to express performance in less technical terms that reflect the public's understanding of the service being provided to them. Both of these have performance measures, and we categorize them into three types. There are prescribed ones from the regulation, so minimum ones that we have to track, and those are for the core assets specifically. And then beyond that, we have foundational metrics, which are typically right now condition-based, but future metrics where we can get into more safety, environmental sustainability, and we can track performance measures over time to see how the overall service being provided is affected by the infrastructure that the city owns. And so at the bottom, you can see the headings of what the level of service framework tables would be. In the asset management plan itself, there are several performance metrics and the current performance of them. Next slide, please.
So Zach just finished describing to you all the levels of service section of the asset management plan, which is a key major content section. And this is another one, the state of infrastructure. It's part of the foundation of building on the analysis that was done for the plan. And it's one of the first steps. It's to understand what the condition and what the general attributes of the assets are that we're looking at. So you're looking at transportation right now. Zach's already spoken a little bit about this. He showed the valuation and the quantity of assets in one earlier slide. And also in addition to that, what we've done in what is required to do is to understand how old the assets are, so what the ages are. And you see that on the right there with the comparison of the average age of all the assets in the major categories compared against what their expected service life is going to be. But more importantly, to understand their condition, because age is not the most important factor in understanding what needs to be done. It's condition. Something could live quite a long time, but still be in very good condition if it's performed well. The inverse can be true. So what you'd expect to see in the report is some figures like this that give you an idea, and we see on the left some asset groupings of bridges fairly in good condition, but a distribution of different conditions amongst different other assets like roads, culverts. And so this is done by collecting condition assessment data, pairing it to the inventories, and just understanding the state of the infrastructure. Next slide, please. And so that all ties together, levels of service, condition, and then a life cycle component where we understand when do these assets need to be replaced, or when do we need to take rehabilitations or any kind of work against them. And that goes together in a bit of a logic to understand what we project, what we anticipate to be the needs over a 10-year period, which is the main focus of the plan. So this plan is compliant with the 2022 regulatory requirements of the regulation. So what they're asking and what we're reporting on is, what does it cost to maintain the level of service that you've established for yourself over the next 10 years? It's not asking anything more than just to keeping things the way they are. And as Zach mentioned, a lot of these key foundational levels of service that were identified were condition-based. So wanting to keep roads in a state of good condition or the similar state of condition. And what you're looking at is a 10-year projection, which with each of those bars representing what the condition profile of the road network is going to be, or the transportation network in its entirety is going to be over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. So a major part, so we're condensing a pretty long document into a short presentation, but a major part at the end of that is understanding continuous improvement. It's very typical and it's part of every asset management plan. The new regulation, most municipalities are just getting in line with the new regulation, their first draft of the asset management plan for this year. Same with the city. And really these recommendations are pretty typical, what you see as people start to come on board with asset management plans that conform to the regulation. And they really are centered around two things, just streamlining asset management processes as part of day-to-day operations and part of something that you do regularly and producing plans like this regularly, and improving data. So a lot of the condition information we had and other information is based on the best available data we have at the time. And there's always need for improvement. So as that data improves, the understanding of what the state of the assets are, what needs to be done is going to get even better and more accurate. And essentially, these initiatives are going to help continually make that even better. I'll turn it over to Brent for the last slide, please. And next slide.
Sorry, maybe if you could just go back to the previous slide. There was just a couple of things I wanted to add on to what Dave mentioned. So there were a number of initiatives identified through the project. As far as areas for improvement, a few immediate ones that we took action on is the implementation of a decision support and modeling tool. So we've started looking at a new software that we would utilize start with our roads and bridge assets, and actually utilize that tool to do some simulations and modeling around using all of our asset condition data found in our cartograph system. Another key initiative is continuing to collaborate with Utilities Kingston around shared projects and planning. One other initiative is around the formation of an asset management steering committee as part of the framework, which includes members from a number of different departments within the city and provides a cross-function of leadership and input that would be part of that committee. A few members that actually took part and are here tonight took part in this initial project. And lastly, to improve our condition data, look to obtain additional grants or funding to help fund those additional condition assessments, whatever they may be, whether they be facilities condition assessments or some other assessments we may use to improve the data quality that we have currently. Next slide, please. So tonight we're here so next steps in order to meet the initial legislative requirement is for committee approval and council endorsement of the core asset management plan that was included in Exhibit A, and we'll go through that a little later on in the meeting. Identify resources, both internal and external, that will be required to meet the non-core asset management regulation that's due by July 1st, 2024. So that's basically taking the existing framework that we've developed for our core assets and utilizing that same framework for all those other asset categories that we walked through earlier on. Those resourcing requirements to meet those objectives, we will incorporate into operating and capital plans for 2023 for approval. One other item will be in future, once the Waban crossing is complete, is to incorporate and use that same asset management framework for that bridge asset. And lastly, continue to work with our climate leadership group on incorporating the findings and recommendations from the climate action plan to identify and incorporate climate change impacts on infrastructure and asset management planning. Next slide, please. So just to conclude the briefing, there are a number of people that work with both GM Blue Plan and the Corporate Asset Management Group on this project. They're here tonight. I know it was a lot of material to cover, so we're happy to answer any of your questions.
Great, thank you very much. I'll turn to the committee now if there are some questions from any committee members. Yes, Councillor Doherty.
Thanks for the presentation. And certainly it's a great thing that you're doing, actually. You can say it's so important to understand future costs and to look after what we already have. So I have a few questions. One is, obviously we read a lot about and hear a lot about the condition of roads. And I noticed it was interesting, the picture that you had, the sliding colors, that's really good. That's a good visual. I was surprised how few roads were in red, where I think the public would probably challenge that, but you have done an assessment, so that's good. The poor conditions seem to just continue into the future as well, where the better quality, like the green did increase and so did the orange, but the red stayed consistently red. And I just wonder if you could speak to that and explain like what's going on there with the roads.
Yeah, I can speak to that if you guys are okay with that. The objective of this iteration of the plan was to kind of maintain that level of service, which was to kind of hold the red steady. So the scenario that was analyzed was set up to be that way, because that is the answer, that is what we're trying to answer for the regulation. They're asking us, what would it cost to keep your level of service where it is? The level of service that was established was to maintain a certain percentage of assets in better than very poor condition. So we've actually that is the constraint. The reason the green would increase is because the logic of the decision tool. As more assets would age, we would repair those and you'd have a bunch of new assets coming in the future. But the reason why the red didn't change is because that's what we were trying to answer. What would it cost if we didn't change that red?
Right, right. And obviously, so there's the fact, so we're actually getting kind of, are we hamstrung by the fact that we've always had, or our roads are in such poor conditions, like some communities have better roads than ours, or it's just for this particular plan? But then it's attached to funding it too, probably later on too, right? So it is a bit of a concern.
Yes, I believe I saw Mr. Falwell's hand.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Chair. And some information that we have been sharing with Council on a fairly regular basis over the last couple of years is the work that we have been doing on our road assets. We're completing biannual road surveys, most recently in 2021. Our next one is scheduled for 2023, and that's where we're analyzing the entire network. That information is the basis that our partners at GM Blue Plan have used and the numbers that are presented in the report. But I can also say that in the last 5 years, our road rehabilitation plan has gone from spending about $500,000 a year and completing 3 lane kilometers of road rehabilitation to spending closer to $6 million a year and 80 lane kilometers of road rehabilitation. So, and that's put us on about 15% of our network. Not the entire thing, but we are getting out to about anywhere from 5 to 6% of our road network on an annual basis with the funding that we've got. We've still got a long ways to go. We do have, close to 900 total kilometers of road network in the city of Kingston, or closer to 1,800 lane kilometers when you add it all up. So that's a significant distance. It's driving from here to Sydney, Nova Scotia, one way. So we are playing a bit of catch up, and we have moved the mark, or more, we've stabilized it, or getting close to stabilizing it, so that we can deal with some of the backlog. But there is significantly more work to be done.
Right. That sounds very. Well, do you want to answer it as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I just wanted to add on to Luke. Councillor Doherty, you noticed that the proportion in green was increasing. That is directly attributed to staff's new approach to be more proactive in the life cycle strategies with rehabilitation program and whatnot. And so you'll see more assets maintaining in a higher proportion of good and very good. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks for that. I also had a question when it comes to like innovation and like the use of new materials. This report, like we're not, we can't, there's no, like it doesn't impact from us trying new type of materials, for example, for road repairs or whatever, when new things come on the market. Like we're not restricted. I guess on one of the slides you had certain numbers and certain levels. It looked like there might have been some restrictions of what kind of work we do. Is there any restriction?
Yes, Mr. Falwell.
Yeah, I think Director Fowler had his hand up. I'll let him go first, Mr. Chair, and then I'll follow in if necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Fowler.
Through you, Mr. Chair. To answer Councillor Doherty's question, there is no restrictions or anything that would eliminate us from trying any new technologies, any innovation. It's purely based on our assumptions as of today, and based on how what our current levels of service are. In future, part of the requirement will be to actually look at our levels of service for all assets as well. And so those level of service measures that you see will apply to all assets, and they would be levels of service that would make sense for those asset classes. But there is nothing from the regulation or nothing from the work we've done that prevents us from trying new things. In fact, we'll we're encouraged to do that. And through this, we've actually been able to, through the work with GM Blue Plan and city staff, been introduced to a number of folks that are, of course, we're all in this together, and many municipalities are in the same situation as we are with respect to their asset management planning and starting on this journey.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. And I just have one more question.
Go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. And that's about parks and recreation, because it's great that this, if I hear correctly, there will be kind of a rotation to make sure the parks are always regularly maintained and the assets are looked after, instead of building like a baseball diamond and kind of forgetting about it. Is that correct? And that's the whole aim with this as well.
Yes.
I'm gonna let Luke take this one, Will.
Yeah,
Thank
through you,
you.
Mr.
You're
Chair. So what's in front of the committee and council right now is a core asset management plan. The non-core assets, which I believe you're referring to in a park type setting, a ball diamond or a swing set, will be a future inclusion in the complete asset management plan for the city of Kingston. So not at this time. We are conducting and improving those assets based on some asset information that we have in terms of replacement at this time, but it is not a holistic asset management plan like we are presenting here tonight for those core assets. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just have two questions. One question is retaining walls. So what are some of the examples of the retaining walls we have in Kingston? Like, is that Wellington Street extension area behind Doug Fleur that's kind of holding up the hill of Rideau Crest? Like, that's a retaining wall. And then where are the others? Like, are some of the retaining walls also like along the waterways, Lake Ontario in Kingston and Cat River?
Mr. Falwell.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. So the retaining walls as part of this definition are retaining walls that play some role in the protection or the ability for a transportation asset or a stormwater asset to function. So it's not like you would see on the shoreline, where we've got our shoreline revetment and structures. Those will come as part of a non-core asset. The one even that you referred in Doug Fleur Park, adjacent to Rideau Crest, that would be, in my interpretation, a non-core asset because it doesn't form part of the transportation or the stormwater assets that we've got. We are learning more about our retaining walls, to be perfectly honest with you. Originally, we had only identified one, and it was adjacent to Artillery Park on Montreal Street. And it's a old stone wall that that's on the west side. But through the process of the work that GM Blue Plan and Brent have been doing, we continue to identify new assets in the retaining wall class. We've created a new retaining wall class as part of this exercise. We've recently built a retaining wall on John Connor Boulevard east of Portsmouth Avenue as another example. And I'm happy to share the list of what we've got. But we have retained the services of our bridge and culvert inspection team that completes our biannual OSIMS inspections, and they will be doing the similar inspection on our newly created retaining wall assets this fall. So we will have more detail on all of those in the fall, and there will be other forms of retaining walls and definitions of that as part of the non-core asset piece that comes in a couple of years too.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. And Director Falwell, I just want to ask, okay, so I think you answered this question to Councillor Doherty, but I just want to hear it again. So I do know in the budget the last 4 years on our roads, it's been $6 million per year, right? So did you say that before like 2019, right, like our 4-year infrastructure plan, we were spending $3 million a year on roads? Is that what you said, 3 million? So basically we've doubled what we've been spending on roads in the last short while. Was it 3 million?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So in 2018, we spent about $500,000 on road rehabilitation. And I can share this information. And I have communicated it to a few of you in the past in road requests. It was 2019 where the original engineering budget for rehabilitation was $3 million, and council doubled that to $6 million. And that's when we began on that trajectory, averaging about $6 million a year on road rehabilitation specifically. And we are in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 lane kilometers with that $6 million in terms of road rehabilitation. It's a number of different forms in what we are doing, and we continue to enhance our abilities and build and increase the tools in our toolbox to maintain the assets from various types of rehabilitation. So it's not a one size fits all, and depending on the condition of that road asset specifically, we've got a number of different treatments that we can apply. So that's what we've been doing for the last few years, and we hope to continue to do so going forward.
Super. Thank you so much.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll move on to the item 7, which is the business item before us. And there are 3 actionable items. The first is the transmittal of School Pedestrian Safety Working Group recommendations memo. And it's quite long. I believe our clerks have kindly put that so that we can put it up on the screen. Thank you. So if we can just quickly take a look at these. And we have it in front of us as well, but this will give the public an opportunity to see it. And like all great working groups, this one has a sunset clause, which has happened. So this is our sole opportunity to approve the recommendations that are before us. So I will turn to the committee if there are any questions or comments that the committee would like to make. Yes, Councillor O'Sana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thoroughly approve all these recommendations. Thank you, staff, for organizing the working group. Thank you to the working group for putting in, like, it sounds like 20 hours into these recommendations. Very much appreciated. Thank you to the working group and staff for actually getting the commitment from the police to commit to an increased presence and enforcement amongst our schools in Kingston. That's quite the accomplishment. Thanks so much. I found it very telling to read in the report that 42% of the students are driven to school throughout Kingston, and that was using 2019 data. What I've heard is that with so many parents working from home during the pandemic and continuing in a hybrid model, that even more parents, are dropping their kids off to school because the school is around the corner. They can now start at 9 in the morning, work because they don't have to spend an hour, driving downtown. And so therefore they can just, drop their kids off to school, drive back home, and then log into the computer. So it's even more parents right now since 2019 driving kids. So it just goes to show how car dependent some of the families are. And it was a really well written report, very well done. And this has been a very difficult issue. So thank you so much for the recommendations, and I support them.
Thank you. And Councillor Doherty, did I see you with your hand up? No? Okay. Any further questions? I will seek a mover and a seconder for the recommendations before us. Yes, Mr. Sullivan.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, and through you, we do need to quickly jump over to the member of the public as well as one of the members of the public that has their hand up.
do we normally wait until the motion's on the floor and go to the public? No?
It goes committee questions, public, and then we put it on the floor.
Okay,
Mr.
no
Chair.
problem at all. Go right ahead. So who did you wish to recognize? Oh, Catherine.
Catherine Rothermel.
Thank you.
The floor is
Thank you
yours.
very much. This is the first time I've been on a committee meeting with the city of Kingston on Zoom. I thank you for all your time and effort on these very important subjects. My question is, and I don't know really what the protocol is here, but it seems to me that the root cause of this conversation about school safety is not being addressed, and that's how do we decrease the 40% of kids that are being driven to school? Is that being addressed in any way? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to other questions. And after 4 or 5, we'll give staff an opportunity to respond. So if there's any other members of the public who wish to ask questions.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no other members of the public.
Okay, then we will close this public part of the meeting and we'll turn to staff to respond to that. Yes, Mr. Semple.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. I think at its a large part of the discussion that the working group had centered around active school travel. And as Councillor Osanic noted, recognizing that there were many trips, that were occurring, especially trips that were occurring that could be walking or cycling trips. In our estimate from the 2019 data, approximately 5,000 trips across the city that could be better accommodated and can be accommodated by walking and cycling in an active way. And so there are the programs that the city runs and our partners run, public health and the school boards are looking at ways that we would enhance and increase active travel. We look at ways that can make that easier. We look at ways that can reduce barriers. And we would look at addressing issues that ensure that active travel would be supported and prioritized. So there are recommendations within this report that speak to enhancing active travel. So that is around enforcement. It is around looking at the way the space is used around the schools to prioritize the areas. The School Streets program is a direct application of active travel and active transportation in removing cars from the area in and around the schools. And we also have other programs in the city, our active transportation master plan and implementation plan, our pedestrian crossing program, our traffic calming program, and others that are all linked to both the recommendations and I think the goal to increase active travel and to council's strategic priorities around enhancing pedestrian safety and increasing active travel.
Thank you very much. And if I can mention as well, there's an organization called KCAT, Kingston Active Transportation, and they're very active in organizing those kinds of things. If you were to send myself or Mr. Semple an inquiry, we can give you the contacts for that organization. So thank you. So now I will seek a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Councillor Osanic, Councillor Doherty, any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that carries. We'll move now on to the second one, which is core asset management plan. And there are a couple of recommendations here. It's shorter, so I will read it. That council adopt the core infrastructure asset management plans as set out on Exhibit A to report EITP 22-006 and provide authority to the Director of Corporate Asset Management and Fleet to make the required non-material amendments to the plans prior to July 1st, 2022 regulatory deadline, and that council direct the Director of Corporate Asset Management and Fleet to make available the final approved core infrastructure asset management plan as amended to the public via the city website. So I'll turn first to the committee if you have any questions or comments. Seeing none, we'll turn to the public. If there are any members of the public, just raise your hand through the Zoom on the bottom, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions or make comments.
And just to remind the members of the public, yes, Catherine Roth-Ramel has raised her hand. We will open up the floor to her.
Go right ahead. Catherine, the floor is yours.
I guess my question is around the categorization of assets, and is there a process in place to change from a core asset to a non-core asset?
Yeah, if staff would like to respond to that, Mr. Fowler.
Thank you for your question. The definitions of the core assets versus non-core assets is something that's part of the regulation and is defined through the provincial guidelines. So I know the naming of non-core makes it sound a little less important than the core, but that's obviously something that the regulation has defined, but we view them all as equally important. So I know the naming doesn't necessarily reflect the importance of some of those, what they call non-core assets.
Thank you. So we will seek a mover and a seconder for these recommendations. Councillor Osanek and Councillor Oosterhoff. Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And our third and final one is establishing climate leadership plan community engagement strategy. And this comes from a report of the Commissioner of Business, Real Estate and Environment, and it's attached. The recommendation is that the Environment, Infrastructure, Transportation Policies Committee recommends to Council that a climate leadership working group be established in accordance with the mandate as outlined in report number EITP 22-007. And there's a whole list of organizations recommended to be part of this working group. Are there any questions regarding this? Are there any additional groups that perhaps the committee feels we've left off? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think it's really important that we include the Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation. Transportation is such an integral part to action on climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, and there is just such an amazing committee. We even heard how they how active they were in our school pedestrian and safety challenges, and they're just an amazing bunch of volunteers with a lot of commitment to reducing greenhouse gases. And actually the previous comment, a couple of comments ago from one of the public members attending today, the question about how to get people out of cars, this is the right committee to help us with that. So I prepared a motion to add the Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, and I've sent it to the clerk.
Great. If the clerks could post that, please.
So I'll read it if you like.
Go right ahead. Sorry, I should have read it. I was reading, but go ahead.
Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Neal, that the recommendation in report number EITP 22-007 be amended by adding a bullet to the end of the list in the third recommend clause reading representative of Kingston Coalition for Active Transportation, KCAT. So that is just added to the list.
Yes, that's duly moved and seconded. Now on the floor. Any other members of committee wish to speak to it? Seeing none, would the public wish to speak to this?
I do not see any hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all those in favor? Carried. And this is a list that we may wish to add to in future or from the floor at council as well. So I did see Julie Salter Kane appeared, and was there anything that you wanted to add to this? I apologize that I didn't recognize and give you the floor right away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, nothing at all. I thought there was going to be a question, so I was getting ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I do, in fact, I've thought of a question, and so has Councillor Asanic. So if you could take the chair, Councillor Asanic.
I take the chair and recognize.
I was surprised, and I should have mentioned this before, that I didn't see any Queen's representative on this, either because they have some very active organizations around climate change as well, both through AMS and through administration. Is that an oversight that you would suggest we amend?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair or Mrs. Chair, there is a representative from Queen's University, and the purpose of the working group are the key community members that can implement the actions of the Climate Leadership Plan. But the community groups and the youth groups are absolutely one of our key groups that we will be looking to partner with. In addition to the recommendation for the working group, there's 3 other strategies that we'll be looking at to implement the Climate Leadership Plan. One is the neighborhood champions, where we'll certainly look to Queens to be one of those neighborhood champions. The other is the youth strategy that we'll be looking at establishing and working with, and the youth organizations in the city will certainly be the key ones that we'll be working with, especially with Queens, St. Lawrence College, etc.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I will withdraw that request. So
I give the chair back to you.
no problem whatsoever. Yes, Councillor Asanic.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. My question is, for all the groups that are going to be part of this committee, do they already know that they're going to be part of it and they've all agreed, or is the next step then to invite them if they want to be part of the group?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So all of the groups, I would say, know that this is coming. Certainly through the working group for the Climate Leadership Plan, we spoke to some type of working group. Certainly the working group on the climate action that we had in 2019 was so successful in making those implementations. So we made those indications that would be one of the recommendations coming forward. So certainly they know that it will be coming, and then after the consideration of council, and if approved, then I'd be reaching out as a formal request to sit on this working group. Thank you. And Manager Salter Keene, do we have someone from Sustainable Kingston on the line tonight? Not from Sustainable Kingston on the line tonight. Oh, no. But, so, okay. Do you know, is there any additional info you can tell us about
like their neighborhood program, like sorry, somehow it got muted again. Yeah, is there any way that you can tell us anything about the neighborhood program?
The neighborhood champions. So yes,
Yes.
we are very excited. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, to establish this neighborhood champions. We've looked at some of the best practices. Vancouver has neighborhood champion programs, and Toronto does in the implementation of their climate leadership plans. So we'll be looking at those frameworks, but working with Sustainable Kingston, we'll use their services and assistance in training those trainers who will go then to the neighborhoods and establishing it. But from the perspective of structure and that, we haven't got too deep into that at this time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm having a senior's moment. We haven't moved or seconded this yet, have we? No, okay. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Osanek, Councillor Doherty. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. And we're a very unanimous group today. So that's the end of our business items for tonight. We have no motions. We have no notices of motion. Other business? Seeing none. Correspondence? Date of our next meeting isn't until Tuesday, August 2nd at 6 p.m. So I guess I get to say have a great summer. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Osanek, Councillor Doherty, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody.